may be seated in the presence of the Lord. Clap your hands if you're ready to receive the word of our God. Ushers, if there's anybody on the outside waiting to get in, you can let them in at this particular moment in time. Before I jump to something new, I want to give a quick recap of what it is that we talked about this past Sunday. This past Sunday, we gave a layman's definition of the word worship, and we discussed that worship is love expressed. That really doesn't mean much to you until you come to the understanding. Dr. Gary Chapman wrote a book entitled The 5 Love Languages, and he contends that every human being has 5 universal love languages. Every human being has 5 different ways they express love, 5 different ways they receive love. Number 1, Dr. Chapman says to all of us, if you love somebody, you will express it. Number 2, Dr. Chapman says to all of us, if you love somebody, not only will you express it, but you will express it in a manner in which they can receive it and understand it. Number 3, Dr. Chapman says to all of us, if you love somebody, you don't mind expressing it in public. Let me back it on up like a U-Haul truck. Number 1, if you love somebody, you will express it. Number 2, if you love somebody, you will express it in a manner in which they receive it and understand it. Number 3, if you love somebody, you will express it in public. He contends there are 5 different ways to express and receive love, which includes words of affirmation, acts of service, quality time, gifts, and physical touch. That is words of affirmation, acts of service, quality time, gifts, and physical touch. As this pertains to worship, I want you to understand that I worship God because I love God. And because I love God, number 1, I express my love to God. If you love God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, you will express it. Number 2, if I love God with all of my heart, soul, mind, and strength, not only will I express it, but I express it in a manner in which God receives it. Although I'm not the type to be lifting my hands because he receives it that way, I express it that way. I'm really not the type to be opening my mouth in worship, but because he receives it that way, I express it that way. Number 3, because I really love God, I don't mind expressing it. Somebody shout in public. You said it, I need you to shout it. Say it again, in public. If I love God, I express it. If I love God, number 2, I express it in a manner in which he receives it. If I love God, number 3, I express it in public. And I contended this past Sunday that the same way that human beings receive and express love, those 5 different love languages, is the same way that we express love to God. I express my love to God, which is worship, through words of affirmation. That because I love God, I worship him by speaking well of him. I express my love to God, number 2, through acts of service. That because I love God, I worship God by serving God. I'm not just content with sitting in the pews. I want to go from sitting to serving, because that's a part of my worship. I don't just serve because the pastor asked me to serve. I serve because it is a part of my worship to God. I express my love to God, number 3, through quality time. That because I love God, I express it by spending time with God through the reading of his word. Number 4, I express my love to God not just through quality time, but through gifts. That because I love God, I express my love to God through the giving of my tithe and my offering. Giving is not something that I do just to get out of the way, but giving is a part of my worship. And last but not least, I express my love to God not through physical touch, but spiritual touch. Every time I pray, I am touching the God of heaven. That really doesn't mean much to you until you come to the understanding that is the layman's terms for worship. Tonight, I want to give you a few biblical definitions for the word worship. So Sunday, I gave you the layman's term for worship. It means love expressed. Everybody say love expressed. Tonight, I'm going to give you some biblical definitions for the word worship. The Old Testament is written in Hebrew. The New Testament is written in Greek. I'm going to say it again. The Old Testament is written in Hebrew. Everybody say Hebrew. New Testament is written in Greek. The Hebrew word for worship in the Old Testament is shakai. Everybody say shakai. It literally means to bow in reverence to one who is superior in rank. I'm going to say it again. It literally means to bow in reverence to somebody that is superior in rank. In the Old Testament, when people greeted each other, if I greeted somebody that had a higher rank than me, I would bow in reverence to that individual. In the Old Testament, when people greeted each other, if I greeted somebody who happened to be my superior, I would bow in reverence to that individual. As a consequence, as it was in the natural, so it is in the spiritual. In the spirit, when you recognize that God is superior, you can't help but to bow. When you recognize that God is superior, you can't help but to worship. As a consequence, the first thing that I want you to understand on tonight is that the foundation of worship is the recognition that God is superior. Did you hear what I just said? I'm going to say it again. The foundation of worship is the recognition that God is superior. So dig this. The only people who don't worship God are those who think that they are equal with God. Wish you could hear what I'm saying. The only people who don't worship God are those who think that either they are equal with God or they think that they are superior and God is inferior. But when you recognize that God is superior, is there anybody in here who can attest to the reality that life has a way of putting you in a situation where you can't do nothing about it? You have to call on God because God is superior. There are some things that you can do something about, and then there are other things that you have absolutely no control over, and you have to call on a superior power, a higher power. I'm talking about the God of heaven. Somebody shout, God is superior. The foundation of worship is the recognition that God is superior. When I recognize that God is superior, I can't help but to worship God. So the only people who do not worship are those who think that they are equal with God, or those who think that they are superior to God. But when you recognize that God is superior, you can't help but to worship. Here's the second thing that I want you to understand on tonight. The Hebrew word for worship is shakai. It means to bow in reverence to a superior rank. In the Old Testament, when somebody greeted somebody that had a higher rank, they would bow in reverence to that individual. The word reverence means to respect. The word reverence means to fear. It does not mean to fear in the sense that I'm trembling in the presence of somebody, but it means that I fear that person in a sense that I respect that person. So watch this. Here's the second thing. Because God is superior, I reverence him. Because God is superior, I respect him. I really believe that a wonderful example of not reverencing and respecting God is when Jesus was on the cross. Anybody remember when Jesus was on the cross? We're getting ready to celebrate Good Friday. On Good Friday, Jesus gave to all of us what it is that we call the 7 last sayings on the cross. Everybody say the 7 last sayings. 7 different things that Jesus said. First thing he said was, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Second thing that he said is, today you'll be with me in paradise. Third thing that he said is, woman, behold thy son. Son, behold thy mother. Fourth thing that he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Fifth thing that he said was, I thirst. Sixth thing that he said is, it is finished. Seventh thing that Jesus said is, into thy hands, Father, I commit my spirit. What amazes me is the second thing that Jesus said. He said, today you will be with me in paradise. Jesus is hanging between 2 thieves. One is on the left, the other is on the right. The one on one side mocked Jesus, and the one on the other side accepted Jesus. But while the one on one side was mocking Jesus, the other thief on the other side looked over across Jesus and said, don't you fear God? He said, don't you reverence God? Don't you respect God? We deserve the punishment that we are getting, but he deserves nothing because he's done nothing but good to everybody else. And you mean to tell me that you have no fear of God, no reverence of God, and the sign that this thief had no fear, no reverence, and no respect of God is because he mocked God himself. As a consequence, when you do not reverence God, not only do you mock God, you mock the people who worship God. So please don't get it twisted. When we come in here and when it is that we worship God publicly, some people are involved in the worship, then others are mocking those who are worshiping God. You ever been sitting next to somebody and they ain't say nothing, but you could just feel their spirit, and their spirit put a damper on your spirit and made you not want to worship? Their spirit was mocking you as you worship. You ever been going broke for God, all in, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and somebody right next to you is sitting there with their arms folded, with their legs crossed, as if it don't take all of that? I wish you would sit down. I wish you would be quiet. I wish you would stop yelling so loud. You getting on my last nerve. Don't you have any fear of God? If you had any fear of God, if you had any reverence for God, if you had any respect for God, you would be worshiping God as well. You wouldn't be sitting there watching me worship God, because worship is not for spectators, it's for participators. So watch this. Number one, the Hebrew word for worship is shakah. It means to bow in reverence to somebody who's superior in rank, which means the foundation of my worship is that I recognize that God is superior. But it also says, number two, because God is superior, I reverence God and I respect God. Now that's the Old Testament. Somebody shout New Testament. New Testament is written in Greek. The Greek word for worship in the New Testament is proskuneo. Everybody say proskuneo. Come on, say it again, proskuneo. I said it like I was in Memphis at first. You know, they put an R on every U, proskuneo. That ain't how I go. It's proskuneo. That's the Greek word for worship. It literally means a towards kiss. Everybody say a towards kiss. Whenever you kiss somebody, you adore that person. When a mother kisses a child, she adores the child. When a father kisses a child, he adores the child. When a husband kisses a wife, he adores his wife. When a wife kisses the husband, she adores the husband. Does everybody hear what I'm saying? So watch this. Due to the fact that the Greek word for worship means a towards kiss, that says that I'm face to face with God in adoration with God. That says to all of us, to worship God is to adore God. To worship God is to give him adoration. Somebody shout, give him adoration. Here's the next thing that I want you to understand. To worship God is not just to give him adoration, but due to the fact that the Greek word for worship means proskuneo, it is a towards kiss. In order to kiss somebody, you got to get close to them. You can't kiss me from a distance. You got to scoot close. I'm going to say it again. You can't kiss me from a distance. You got to scoot close. So guess what? If proskuneo means a towards kiss, that means in order to worship God, not only do I adore God, I got to be close to God. Does everybody hear what I'm saying? You can't worship God from a distance. But you got to have an intimate relationship with God to be able to worship God. You got to be close to God. So to worship God does not just mean to give him adoration. It literally means to draw close to God. So when you put the Old Testament and the New Testament definition of worship together, it literally means to worship God means to bow to God because God is superior, to reverence God because God is superior, to adore God because God is superior, and to draw close to God because God is superior. That's what it means to worship. Notice nowhere in the definition did I say anything about music. Because you can sing and still not be worshiping God. You can be singing about God, but if you don't have reverence for God, it's still not worship. You can be singing about God, but if you have no adoration for God, it's still not worship. You can be singing about God, but if you're not drawing close to God, it's still not worship. You can be singing about God, but if you don't recognize that God is your superior, it is still not worship. So dig this, I can worship God although I'm not singing at the same time. But I can sing and worship God at the same time as well. In other words, I can worship God, but I don't have to be singing to worship God. The only requirement for me to be able to worship God is to bow because he's my superior, to reverence him because he's my superior, to adore him because he's my superior, and to draw close to God because God is my superior. Everybody shout, that's worship. I want you to jaywalk to John chapter number 4. I want to teach this text on tonight, and I'm getting ready to raise up. John chapter number 4, this is a familiar passage of Scripture. We are introduced to who it is that we call the woman at the well. Everybody say the woman at the well. The Bible does not give us her name. It only tells us that she is the woman at the well. This woman is not at the well in the morning or the evening in the cool of the day. She's at the well when it's hot. It is 12 noon. The question has to be raised, why does she go at 12 noon when all of the other women go to the well at 6 a.m. or 6 p.m.? She's at the well at 12 noon because she's trying to avoid the other women, because she don't want to make small talk with the other women, because she's ashamed and embarrassed about her past. And there's somebody in here under the sound of my voice, you are ashamed and you are embarrassed about your past. And I want you to know, regardless of what you have done in the past, you have nothing to be ashamed about, nothing to be embarrassed about, because no matter how good we look on the outside, everybody in here is an ex something. Did you hear what I just said? So she's at the well and Jesus shows up. The Bible declares that Jesus is not even going to the well. He's going somewhere else. But the King James says he must needs go through Samaria. In other words, he knows that this woman is going to be at the well, and he has an appointment with this woman, although she does not know that she has an appointment with Jesus. So she shows up at the well thinking that nobody's going to be at the well, and Jesus is propped up on the well. Jesus is a Jew, and he's going through Samaria. Jews and Samaritans did not get along with each other. So he's literally risking his life in order to help and to bless this lady. And that sounds like exactly what he did for us. He didn't just risk his life for us. He lost his life for us in order to save us and to bless us and to help us to blossom into all that he's ordained for us to be. So Jesus is propped up on the well. This woman shows up, and the first thing that Jesus says is, T-Pains, can I buy you a drink? He says, give me something to drink. And immediately the woman says back to Jesus, don't you know that Jews have no dealings with Samaritans? If you knew that I'm a Samaritan and you a Jew, you ain't got no business talking to me, no way. And then Jesus says back to the woman, if you knew the gift of God that you were talking to, you'd be asking me for something to drink. But because you don't know who you talking to, you get flipped at the mouth. You got to be careful when you get flipped at the mouth, because you don't know who you talking to in the first place. You don't know who God's going to send to bless you. You don't know who God is going to use to bless you. You got to treat everybody right. See, you can't step on and step over people to get to the top, because the same people you step on and step over to get to the top are the same people you got to pass on your way back down to the bottom. So she gets her attitude, and Jesus says that if you knew who you were talking to, you'd be asking me for something to drink. She says, why would I ask you for something to drink? He says, whoever drinks this water from the well of Jacob is going to thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give shall never thirst again, because I'll be inside of them a spring of water welling up on the inside. In other words, the water that she was going after would satisfy her temporarily, but Jesus says, if you get some of this living water, I will satisfy you eternally. This woman had an issue. Her issue was that she's trying to fill a permanent void with temporary pleasures. And so many people in church have the same issue. We got a permanent void. There is a spot inside of all of us that only God can fill. Drugs can't fill it. Sex can't fill it. Friends can't fill it. Everybody in here, a man and a woman, has a G spot. That is a God spot. That is the spot that only God can fill inside of your life. She's trying to fill a permanent void with temporary pleasure. She's been in relationship after relationship after relationship after relationship. She's been married 5 times, divorced 5 times. She's sung Jagged Edges, Meet Me at the Altar 5 times. She's sung Usher Raymond's Ready to Sign Them Paper 5 times. She's been to the church throwing bouquets 5 times. She's been in front of the judge at the courthouse 5 times. And now she's given up on marriage because now she's with somebody, but she decides that because I've done this 5 times and it did not work, this time I'm going to have a safety net in case it does not work. I don't have to pay all these legal fees to get this joker out of my life. So isn't it amazing that before Jesus even has this conversation and makes this water offered to this woman, he digs into her past. He says, go call your husband. The moment she asked for this living water of which she would never thirst again, Jesus says, I'm going to give it to you, but before I give it to you, we're going to deal with your past. He says, go call your husband. She says, ain't got none. I just got to say it like I'm in Eastlake. Okay, somebody ain't from Eastlake. You from Mount Brook. I don't have a husband. But what she really said, I ain't got none. I ain't got no husband. He said, you're right. You don't have a husband. You've had 5, and the one that you are with now is not your husband. You just shacking up. And immediately when he starts to dig into her past, she diverts the conversation and starts talking about worship. She's talking about worship, not because she really wants to know about worship. She's using worship in order to divert from having to deal with the pain of talking about her past. But what amazes me is that before Jesus talks to her about worship, he digs in her past. Before he talks to her about worship, he makes her come clean about her past. Before he talks to her about worship, he makes her be transparent about her past. That says to all of us, number one, worship requires transparency. Everybody say transparency. And vulnerability in the presence of God. Worship requires transparency. Everybody say transparency. Everybody say vulnerability in the presence of God. I can't worship God being fake. I can't worship God acting as if I've never done anything wrong. I can't worship God acting like I crossed every T, acting like I dotted every I. God wants me to be transparent before him. See, many of us think you got to be perfect in order to worship. You don't have to be perfect to worship. You got to be transparent in order to worship. None of us are perfect. You saying, I don't want to worship because I don't want to be a hypocrite like all them other people in church. A hypocrite is not somebody who goes to church and does not mess up. A hypocrite is somebody who goes to church acting like they ain't never messed up. I wish you could hear what I'm saying. Hypocrite ain't somebody who goes to church, doesn't mess up. Somebody who goes to church acting as if they've never messed up. So number one, this scripture teaches us that worship requires transparency and vulnerability in the presence of God. Number two, worship is not confined to a geographical location. Everybody repeat after me. Worship is not confined to a geographical location. Say it one more time. Worship is not confined to a geographical location. Because of this, I don't have to wait till I get to New Rising Star Church to worship. I can worship wherever I am. Have you not considered in the Old Testament, Psalms 120 through Psalms 134? Those are a group of worship songs. When you look inside of the Bible, it has the subtitle, A Song of Degrees, or A Song of Going Ups. When they went to worship, they went to the temple in Jerusalem. The temple in Jerusalem was on a hill, which means that they climbed a hill. They went up in order to worship. And they would sing these worship songs on the way to corporate worship. They did not wait until they got to corporate worship to start worshiping God. They would enter into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise, and they would be worshiping on their way to worship. When you understand that worship is not confined to a geographical location, you don't wait until you get into the sanctuary to worship God. When you understand that worship is not confined to a geographical location, you don't wait until you get to New Rising Star Church and the praise team is singing and the Hammond B3 organ is playing and they on the keys and the drums are playing and the guitars and the strings are playing to worship God. When you understand that it's not confined to a geographical location, all you need is a flashback to say, when I think of his goodness, I can't help but thank him for all that he's done. When I think, I can't help but to thank. And the reason you ain't thinking, because you ain't thinking about nothing. But if you can just take a moment to think about all of the stuff that he's done on your behalf, you can't help but worship him, not just in the sanctuary, but anytime I get to thinking about his goodness. Some of my best worship ain't at New Rising Star. Some of my best worship is when I'm driving all by myself, tears running down my eyes and nobody's bothering me, kids sitting in the back seat talking about, Daddy, what's wrong? Ain't nothing wrong. I just got to thinking about how good God is. That's when I know how to worship. It's not confined to a geographical location. Watch this. After the woman at the well talked to Jesus about which mountain to worship in, she says, we Samaritans worship in this mountain. That's location. You Jews worship in this mountain. That's location. John 4, verse number 20. Jesus then told her that we worship God in spirit and in truth. In other words, it's not about where we worship. It's about who we worship. Do you hear what I'm saying? Ain't got nothing to do with the geographical location. Here's the last thing, and I'm getting ready to raise up. God is seeking true worshipers. Everybody repeat after me. God is seeking true worshipers. Anybody ever read the scripture, seek the Lord while he is near, call on the Lord while he may be found? Many of us are stuck seeking after God, and you don't even realize that this next scripture says, when you trying to find God, he looking for you. Somebody say that you was looking for me. Here I go. God is seeking, somebody shout, true worshipers. Jesus says, John chapter number 4, verse 23, but the hour cometh and now is, the hour cometh and now is, when true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father is seeking true worshipers. What I want you to get out of this is that God is after you. See, many of us give the devil too much credit because you're always talking about how Satan is after you, but Satan ain't the only somebody after you. God is after you. Whenever somebody is in danger and they send a rescue crew out for the person that is in danger, that person has to have an identification marker in order to be found. If they got a flag, they'll start waving the flag to say, hey, I'm in trouble, I need some help. So if you're flying over me, this is how you can identify me, by the waving of the flag. Well, God is looking for people, but the only way he can identify the people that he's looking for is when we wave the flag of worship. So every time I worship, it makes me noticeable in the eyesight of God. So the only people who don't worship are those who don't want to be noticed by God. The only people who don't worship are those who don't need God to help them, those who don't need God to rescue them, those who don't need God to come for them. But if you need God to notice you because you're sinking in what it is that you are dealing with, don't wait until you get out to give him the glory. Wave your worship flag while you are still in it. And if you can worship him while you are still in it, God says it makes you easily identifiable. Does everybody hear what I'm saying? If you don't get anything else from this, I want you to understand that worship, although I can worship God with music, worship is not about music. It literally means that I bow in reverence to God because he is my superior. It literally means that I draw close to God because I recognize him as my superior. It literally means that I adore him because God is my superior. I'm praying for you on tonight. I'm praying that you have a deeper level of understanding of worship and what worship is able to do for your life. Never allow your past to prevent you from worshiping. But the fact that he's seeking you in spite of your past, it ought to provoke you to worship. Everybody's